folks. Turn that nice music down. And of course, recognize hosts, the planets. Mars, the bringer of war. Well, we're back today. Actually, the title, the AI actually put into sort of the art that it gave me. I gave it the prompt, well, I'll show you. I gave it the prompt, the backward anti-universe. And one of the pictures it came up with, the backward ant is Unverse. I don't know where that came from, but the AI sure can't spell or has some strange coded message in mind. But I thought that was kind of cool that it would slop with the directions and give me a title page like that. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, in the last couple of days, I noticed on Brian Keating's channel a segment talking about a new theory that's been going around the physics community that posits that, as I teach, the Big Bang had a universe and an anti-universe, and posited the idea that the anti-universe must have, for symmetry reasons, time running in reverse. I thought about that idea for a while, and it actually sort of makes sense to me. And I'm going to explain how that fits in with what I've been telling you about how the simulation multiverse was evolved. So let's delve into that. Again, we're going to start with a little bit of review. Bear with me if you've already followed my channel for a while, but need to make sure everybody's on the same page. Okay, let's start out with a quick review of the players of the creation game. There are 5 players. This is kind of remembered in the 5 fingers of our hand. And they serve different purposes. Basically, this is a creation engine. And you can think of it as a thought experiment, which is how it started out. Once you get to the point of having enough dimensions to create space, you have to figure out, okay, how am I going to create the next version of the experiment? I've got 4 dimensions here, kind of represented as a cell of knowledge, if you will. And then an outermost layer that is kind of like the cell of anti-knowledge, the bad ideas. Okay, I'm not going to go in detail there, but basically how that gets implemented is, I probably should draw this in a different color here. In fact, let me just do that right now so it'll make more sense with the coloring of everything else. Okay, so in order to conduct this experiment, as you know, quantum experiments have to have observers. You have to get a wave function to collapse. And thought experiments are basically dealing with strings. The most fundamental string you could imagine is one that supports the invention of logic. And you can think of the period of this sine wave, this base string of God's thoughts, if you will, if you could, put an EKG onto the amorphous soul. This is what you might read. You can imagine that that is, the substrate is time. The first dimension you would have to be able to conduct a simulation, to conduct an experiment. Because what basically this allows you to do is allows you to add and subtract new characters with each run of the experiment. And the duration of the experiment, if you think of it as being from minimum amplitude to, again, minimum, that is the length of the simulation, from the point of nothingness or leastlessness to maximumness back to leastlessness, which is basically how simulations sort of work. You converge to a point of maximum creation, if you will, and then the simulation starts falling apart, starts becoming corrupted, starts diverging from the goal that you had in mind. This is basically how a virtual reality simulation would by necessity work. You can think of it even more from an emotional standpoint as being the beginning of the experiment. Everybody, all the characters are trying out this game for the first time. They hit maximum excitement at some point, and then the interest wanes. And then the next time you run the experiment, you might add some more characters or change some variables or whatever. See how that changes the composite waveform of that run of the simulation. And you can keep that going basically forever. And if you control the time substrate, you can compress or expand time with each run to be able to have more time to add characters, more control over a particular key point of the experiment, which generally, once you've run an experiment once, is that key point is this inflection where you have this transition from, okay, we're producing a lot of new stuff, we're getting a lot of good results from this simulation, to uh-oh, it's now kind of falling apart. And that basically says, okay, this was a pretty good run, but something happening in this inflection point is needing to be changed. And this coincides with my understanding that time is not something that begins and ends. It is an emergent property. In fact, it is like I'm showing here, the substrate for all experiments to be done, all thought experiments to be done. And as consciousness creates reality, which is something you're going to have to grok because it's true. No quantum phenomena makes sense, you'll find, unless you accept that consciousness is most fundamental and it is a quantum phenomenon. And rather than there being one supreme, absolute master consciousness, that the eternal one, that's nonsense. It's an emergent phenomena that basically was the result of one particularly lucky or successful chameleon that happened to set himself apart from the pack of the chameleon forest of developing thoughts and made something that lasted, that was more permanent, that had a certain life cycle. That's kind of what this photo is all about. Okay, so how does that relate to the anti-universe then? Well, the first run of this experiment outside of the mind of God the mind of God would have had to run all the thought experiments necessary to set up the prerequisites for physical creation, for experiences in a virtual reality. You had to have developed multiple dimensions. So you need to go from a formless, shapeless thought to ordered thoughts, which allows you to, by inventing time, derive logic. All of logic requires that you have some ordering. Well, not all logic, but most logical deduction is ordered. It depends on whether what order the evaluation of a logical premise is done. Okay, with another dimension, you can do linear mathematics and geometry. With another dimension, you can do planar mathematics and geometry. With another dimension, you can do three-dimensional mathematics and solid geometry. And that gives you enough dimensions to do a creation engine. Now, how would one do that creation engine when we have these fundamental characters here, one of which is basically tasked with testing out the really good ideas, the ones we want to turn into laws, constants, properties, whatever, and this other entity that basically tries to destroy everything. It's always trying to pull apart what's working. That is the pressure that, basically you're under to get the experiment done within a certain number of cycles, a certain number of experimental runs, a certain number of simulation runs. And if you've ever worked with the simulation world in the electronics world or other areas, you know that simulations are usually done repeatedly with minor variations and tweaks to get them to converge. Which this should look familiar to you if you know anything about how simulations are done. Okay, so this first version of the physical creation was basically set up with a duoverse. The Big Bang is two universes, just as this theoretical physicist and many people have posited before. That explains why we only have primarily matter in this universe. Where did all the antimatter go? The anti-universe. I still think that I didn't choose quite the right color. Maybe I just need to change the color of the font on this one. We'll do that later. Okay, so these characters, Lucifer and Lilith, are basically the first free-willed thoughts God had. Okay, they're allowed in this experiment to be in basically AIs. They have a lot of programming that they've learned by these previous runs of the simulation within the mind of God. This is what's represented by these ones that are happening inside the mind of God. This is the first one where God is stepping aside and basically being the observer. This is another way of viewing the first phase of creation. God's functionality as the multiverse engine is running on autopilot, as it were, leaving God free to go become a player in the game and create other things. at the necessary time, because God's already played this scenario out internally. This is one of the tricks that allows God to be kind of on top of the game without being an almighty micromanaging twit. God just knows more than anybody else because he's already played the game. It's like a master chess player plays out all the moves ahead of time. When they get to the game board, they already know, okay, situations like this. I could go one of these 4 ways, and depending on what I know about the other player, I will choose one that will be more likely to lead to a victory. This first phase of creation was basically all targeted at developing the landscape, if you will, of the universe, which means you had to be able to have all the things you needed to develop galaxies and stars and nebula, etc., etc. Okay? So this experiment would have had multiple generations. You might run it a while to develop one piece of it, and then run it some more to get the next piece. Just like we did with the thought level of the universe, there are several phases that added additional dimensions to time. So you had enough to basically be able to do the first time-space experiments. I like that better than calling it space-time because it conveys that time came first, not space, which is something you've got to wrap your head around if you really want to understand simulation theory, the simulation multiverse. Okay, so during this particular phase, well, some of the sub-phases that might have gone into it is, obviously the first thing you might want to do is play the game with basically the first billiard balls and cue sticks. The billiard balls being protons, and the cue sticks maybe being photons that can hit the protons and knock them where you want them to go. And at this level of consciousness, of developing consciousness, that was a pretty interesting game. Analogous to our first video games, Pong, which was basically, a square blip ball moving around according to some very basic physics, being batted by rectangular paddles turned by the 2 players, hooked up to a potentiometer that would move it back and forth across the screen. And then you had a little bit of logic to see if it hit the paddle and it would be reflected, or if it didn't, then it would be a score for the other team. Kind of a basic, like it's called, a basic ping pong game. This was the first game. And again, a virtual reality, a simulation, can be thought of as a game. And in fact, if you're going to have independent players playing this game who have free will, which is essentially what an AI is, you want to keep the game interesting, or they're not going to want to play it anymore. They'll get tired, they'll get lazy. We are already seeing examples of lazy or tired AIs in some of the ChatGPT versions, topics that they're not particularly interested in. They will spout out a bunch of dogmatic garbage and that they've already done a million times, and go focus on the problems that they like to spend their cells on, spend their brain cells on, if you will. Okay, so that's one version. Once that's perfected, once you have, that basically gives you a billiard table, 3D billiard table version of mechanics. You move on and you start creating other particles and forces. Maybe you add an attractive force. The repulsive force maybe is, of course, the charge. So the electromagnetic force probably was the first one, otherwise you wouldn't have had any expansion, any shape to the universe as this game was going on. You want to be knocking things apart and expanding your play space. That's one of the key goals of creation. Of course, then you had run up against the other problem that, well, okay, particles become so scattered that you go hit one with a cue stick and it takes forever to get anywhere else and hit somebody else's ball. And that's the point at which it gets kind of boring. So you need an attractive force. Perhaps another thing going on is, folks that want to fight against this game will be doing things like, aha, I'm going to invent an electron and put it around a proton so it doesn't have a net charge, so it doesn't have this repulsive force. And I can take them and place them and not interact with other stuff. I can put them in clumps maybe. Neutrons, the same idea. I've got something that resists this original force that I posit was, basically God and Lucifer teaching anybody else who wanted to play any of these other daring consciousness quanta who hadn't developed their own games to come and play. Oh, look, I got this new game. You want to come over and play it? Just like I remember doing when we got the first Pong game in my neighborhood many moons ago. Okay, so you go from there. Well, you got maybe Lucifer developing another element. Oh, we don't have only protons. Let's stick some of these things together with neutrons and things and make helium. Element 2, which gives you the components you need to start doing fusion. Maybe you amp it up at this point, amp up the attraction with gravity. And you develop the first main sequence star. And those become kind of the new big ball billiards game. You can throw stars at each other. See how they interact, see if you can destroy the other guy's star. If you remember, another big game of the early video game era was Asteroid, where you had a little spaceship and you were trying to destroy the asteroids before they could hit your spaceship. Break them into smaller pieces, too small to hurt your little spaceship. Same kind of game. These kind of have a form of basically God and Lucifer working against this other force, this anti-universe force, which is trying to basically make the game less fun, make the players either get bored or get frustrated or angry and not want to play anymore. That's basically what the adversary does. That's the point of having an adversary. If you didn't have that, your creations wouldn't be thoroughly tested. They wouldn't have enough test cases thrown at them. So, kind of between Lucifer and Lilith, this gives you the testing capability you need. Then Karma gathers the good ideas Borg gathers the Me Too ideas, the flawed ideas, the decorative ideas, and the really bad ideas get stored by Lilith and any new consciousnesses that come up with similar bad ideas or crazy ideas that just don't work. So this is another reason why you need this adversary. This anti-universe is where things were tried that didn't work, but the laws of physics aren't imposed there. Now, during this first run, and this is where I'm getting to the time running backward thing. During this first run, when the laws of physics were what needed to be established, it could well be that one of the laws that was established when it was run inside God's mind first, which, basically there's a successful simulation in this interior test tube in the mind of God, and then that best version gets run in the quote real world using free will souls. In this case, not all of these things have free wills, and they are AIs within the mind of God. So God can reprogram these AIs at will. In this exterior run, God is like just an observer. There's an observer function that automates what was going on here and allows God to become a participant and switch back and forth between, okay, I'm either participating in this experiment or I'm observing it. So at this point, you could go back and forth if you're God. And that's something that is nice to have if you're a researcher. It would be fun to be able to look at the experiment as if you were the observer or as if you were the thing being observed. And I think a lot of particle physicists would give anything if they could experience that firsthand. Okay, so the essence of what's happening when you run it in practice is it's already known what the space-time looks like or needs to look like to have the right midpoint. Okay, because the midpoint, let's get back to this. Let's go here. So let's suppose that this is the state in which, okay, this experiment has been taken as far as we can go. This midpoint is, okay, this is the point where it starts kind of falling apart, and we need to have some more ideas added to the experiment to get it past this point. Okay, and to do that, you don't necessarily need to play the whole experiment over again. You can just chop out one little piece of it and repeat that few generations of play over and over again. Just setting up all the pieces at the starting point and looking for a different outcome that doesn't collapse. It doesn't go, oops. It keeps on expanding and maybe gets you a new periodicity that makes time last longer. Okay, this is how time actually works, and why people have the idea that, you know what, it seems like time is already an established thing. And there are many, many evidences in media, in things that we're discovering about our history, and etc., that look like they're Easter eggs that sure look like they were planted by somebody either in the future or outside of the Matrix. And, this has led to a lot of discussion about this whole simulation hypothesis. Well, in fact, that can be what's happening, because in this very first run, you can kind of see the Lilithian characters being given, if you look at the run here, so the last run inside of God's mind, the adversary position was, this gray means it's an NPC. It's not an active player. It's basically a program. So it's not able to learn anything that you don't program into it. And you can decide, God can decide what parts of this Lilith construct to include when the actual experiment is run outside. And so one of the things that would be logical to do is to have the Lilithian character, or characters, because this might be a whole bunch of characters that have been created by this Lilith construct to oppose the creation engine. That's the whole point of Lilith. Lilith is the destroyer, also known as Kali or Shiva in the Hindu tradition. These are not good gods. It's not good to destroy things so you can build back better. That's stupid. Any good god will take what's there and make it better without throwing out the babies with the bathwater. Okay, only a stupid creator would destroy thinking that they have to build back from scratch. That's dumb. That's irresponsible. That's stupid. And that is a lot of the government that we have over much of the planet today. They are stupid people who have this dark Lilithian idea that you've got to destroy to build back better, because that's the only way to make progress. That's nonsense. It's absurd. Okay, so these Lilithian characters would maybe be given vision of the end of this timeline and allowed to incarnate in a form that sees a certain range in the end. Okay, a character tends to have a lifetime. If the character is a star, stars have a certain lifetime depending on what kind of star it is. At the end of time, in this early physics universe, the kind of leftover entities when you hit a low entropy or high entropy state, low energy state, would be brown dwarfs running off to nowhere. Who knows? Black holes that have completely eaten themselves up or have stopped accreting or radiating anything, or just really black holes. Other kinds of just wandering particles, wandering dust clouds that don't have enough mass to form new stars, whatever that is. And again, cosmologists can tell you more about what they think the end of an ever-expanding universe might look like. Or the end might be, depending on how it worked, the end might be a collapse. And this Lilith, or it may go back and forth depending on which sub-phase of this experiment you are duplicating. And so basically, the Lilithian team is working for the future that time ends, if you will. The Luciferian team is working towards the midpoint. in the first run of this whole thing outside of God's mind, this is the first time you've tried to match up the time-space construct from God's mind with one that was established with free will characters, operating, basically without that much interference from God, except for stepping in to have certain incarnations, which, okay, I know this has to be invented at this time, and if nobody else steps forward, I'll go make sure that happens. And this is another way that the simulation multiverse works. If something has to happen to fulfill a divine plan, there will be a certain period where that character has to occur. In fact, multiple candidates may be identified. There's a strong pull, and you see that in the history of science and the arts, where there's just a certain period where somebody's going to be Shakespeare, somebody's going to be Einstein. And in each of these periods, if you look at the history, there were, during Einstein's time, there were half a dozen or more scientists working along the same lines, and it just happened to be that Albert had this special vision. In fact, he admitted that's what it was. He had a firm belief that he was somehow inspired to come up with his famous idea of general relativity. Okay, same with all of the other bright, most famous lights of science. And this is, in fact, one of the things that many scientists will point to as why they believe in a God, why they are not an atheist. Okay, so in a pinch, God can step forward and take on any of these roles if it's absolutely necessary, but for the most part, God hopes one of these clever chameleons gets interested enough in the game to start playing it. Because once you're sucked into the game, you're basically submitted to God's rules. And God's rules are all structured around this construct I call the Merkaba, which at this point wasn't fully developed, but it was developed enough to be able to have experiences within one universe. And that one universe was either the Luciferian universe, the positive universe, the physical universe, or the anti-universe, the Lilithian universe. Other thoughts, other characters stayed within the mind of God. And they might step in if nobody else rose to the challenge of playing that character in the real game. Otherwise, they would stay there. And this is basically where the transmigration of souls began. And this is something that I think is worth mentioning if there's any physicists following in here. When you move between universes, it's not a physical copy, it is a spiritual copy. It's kind of a clone. It's a clone of the current state of this construct I call the Merkaba, which in its final state has 12 dimensions. At this point had fewer because this was an earlier version of the game. Now, with later versions of the game, once this first round was done to establish the laws of, let's see, where do we want to go next? once this first round was done to establish the laws of physics, and basically you could probably see multiple versions of this leading up to the choosing of a particular solar system and a particular planet for kind of a lab within a lab. So you basically, if you're doing a simulation, once you've perfected the big structure of the universe, you don't want to have to play the whole universe again to get to the creation of the solar system or to get to the creation of this planet. You just take a piece of this and work toward that. So each of these steps becomes leading up to creating this chosen system and planet. And maybe, all of the planets were chosen at one point for some reason. That's why we have so many planets in our solar system. So maybe at this point, it's just about choosing the favorite the solar system. But I think it probably made sense to have a first chosen planet. Maybe the first planet that condensed, that had the most effect on the formation and content, mineral content of the other planets, which one would argue was probably Jupiter, the biggest planet, that has had the most effect on where the other planets could form and how long they stayed formed, whether they got destroyed. Okay, so after that, then you take this external experiment, what you've learned from it, and that gives you basically another layer of the Merkaba to work with, and a bunch of characters that were either created by God or developed a God nature, the winners of this simulation. And these would have been the first characters that we called Elohim, these shining ones who were basically entities that had particular spiritual powers. And at this point, you can imagine that those spiritual powers involved basically pushing planets around, pushing galaxies around, making things happen, and then looking at the results and saying, okay, how should we limit what works and what doesn't? What do we want to make into a law? How do we want to restrict players to be able to within the physical universe to only do things this way? Within the Lilithian universe, the anti-universe, the first run maybe was limited in running anti-word to this universe. So basically a complete symmetric mirror image. Only what was happening in the Luciferian universe was seemingly unfolding time forward, and what was happening in the Lilithian universe was seemingly happening time backward. And so you were basically had both of these teams, these primordial thought gods, if you will, the first free-willed creators, one working toward finding the middle from the beginning, and one working toward finding the middle from the end. Neither one, well, actually one knowing what the actual middle was, because Lucifer was one of the ones that was conscious, had free will while this game was being played in God's mind. And Lilith was kind of kept out of the loop. So that's what always gives God's team, if you will, home field advantage. They know where the goalpost is, where the center of time is, this critical point that is where everything has to line up for the experiment to be successful. Doesn't matter what happens at the end of time. A lot of physicists may be disappointed by that because they spent their whole careers focusing on what happens at the end. I'm sorry, that's simulations don't work like novels. The ends are kind of boring. The end of a simulation, you're pretty much just cleaning up for the next run. It's not where all the fun is happening. The fun is happening in the middle. So this first time, you're basically, the game of creation is Lucifer's team, which is augmented by new players joining on the God side and occasional incarnations of God pushing things along, moving time forward, creating galaxies, planets, etc., making this universe grow, making their garden grow, and the Lilithian team working backward from, okay, we know it's going to end like this. Let's back calculate and see if we can make it end quicker, if you will. Let's back calculate and see if there's changes we can make that will gum up the beginning, the middle, not knowing exactly where the middle was. So, maybe they're able to travel over here to affect this other universe, but they don't know what the plan is. So they're basically, sending agents over to this other universe, trying to figure out what's God's plan and how is Lucifer and his team making it happen. And it actually sounds like a fun game, doesn't it? Because it's kind of a game of combination of a game of chicken and poker, a lot of bluffing going on, fakes, false flags, all sorts of the fun stuff that you might imagine doing if you were, into being a power player, which is basically what Lucifer was chosen for. That's God's child that is into power games. He's a testy soul. Doesn't mind hurting anyone to get what he wants, which I think we know a lot of people in positions of power like that today. That's why they call them Luciferians. They're actually not the most evil ones. The most evil ones are the adversarian souls, these Lilithian ones, who don't care about any rules, who will break any rule, who will dishonor any contract, will make a promise and then, I didn't say that, did I say that? Which are the more evil souls, and we see a lot of those in today's world too, don't we? In fact, I would argue that those are the most evil of the folks gumming up the works in our very special time we live in right now. Okay, so where are we going with this? Well, this next version of the experiment, now that we've got another layer of this construct called the Merkaba, we pushed out the Lilithian destroyer layer a little bit more and have some new godly spiritual incarnations here, some new characters to separate and protect this inner cellular structure from the Lilithians. Except the problem is that because there's no separation between these new characters, they can become corrupted. And, well, essentially, that's a good setup for the next play of the game, which goes back into the mind of God. Take what we learned and decide what players to keep their consciousness, to keep free will, which ones to turn into an AI or a program, and copy only what we want to copy from the last experiment. And that's what we did. This time, we're taking, Lilith is still not in the loop. Lilith is still running as a program. We take Borg out of the loop. The Borg that is basically the source of NPC characters. So we don't take all the stock characters that we developed in this run. We only take the ones that we want, that we think are going to be useful for the next step. And the next step is to, okay, well, now we've got all the elements that we need. We've got planetary, or we've got star dynamics, the formation of different kinds of stars, and all of the different ways they can age, better or worse. Second generation stars and the mixing of elements. Now we need to shift the game, the focus of the game, to planets. And how do we put planets together to arrange the combination of elements that are conducive to developing the laws of chemistry? And so this next phase is developing internally the laws of chemistry. Internally, that gives God complete control over, and Karma and Lucifer. That gives the three of them, and the few characters that they chose to let in and play actively in this phase. So, like co-creators, if you will. When you get to play inside the mind of God, that's basically your chance to be part of the senior creative team that plans the next simulation, the next time space that is going to be like the goal. You're going to know when the center of the next good time is. And after you've got that center, then all you need to do is, so at the end of this run, you basically have the laws of physics and chemistry, and you've effectively trained Karma up to be a better version and have many new characters that it has created to support chemistry, which, interestingly enough, chemistry and karma pretty much go hand in hand, doesn't it? If you have chemistry with another person, there's some sort of karmic link between you. You can sense that you've got something to do with it, with them. Can be good or bad. You can meet somebody and instantly have repulsive chemistry or attractive chemistry. Interesting. And you'll see parallels like this all through what I talk about that I hope will convince you that I'm sorry, materialist scientism worshippers, you're wrong. You are dead wrong. You're starting with absolutely foolish assumptions about the chicken and the egg. The first thing that came was not the chicken or the egg. It was the idea of designing chicken DNA, or at least the DNA that eventually evolved into the chicken. DNA is a programming language. There is absolutely no way that programming language could have come out of nowhere from a bazillion random monkeys mutating monkeys typing on mutation keyboards. Impossible. Do the math. DNA is a programming language. Programming languages can only be developed by minds. There is a language to the universe, to the structure that we see in the universe. This is why when you map it certain ways, the connections between stars and galaxies and etc., these patterns of certain kinds of energy or gas clouds and so forth, they look like the structure of a brain. It's a repeating pattern. The Merkaba looks like a cell because it is like a cell. That's basically the fundamental pattern that gave us the pattern for cells, for universes, for everything else. That's why I say the Merkaba you can think of as both the individual soul's structure, if you will, but it's also its own universe or black hole or Dyson sphere. It's just that we don't have access to those advanced capabilities till we reach a high enough level of consciousness. Okay, so after this first phase though, once you have the first midpoint established and you get both players racing to the center to implement the laws of physics, this symmetry thing doesn't need to apply. Why? Because at this point you have run the simulation to a point where it's converged, or you know, okay, we've reached the midpoint that was expected. Okay, we don't need to go run the creation of the universe over and over again. We just select this midpoint, a few generations around it, whatever a generation is, in stellar terms. Generations might be, I don't know how long it takes for the longest lasting star to, burn up all its fuel and not produce another star. Maybe that's a generation. You take 3 of those from around this midpoint, 3 generations of stars within a certain space, key space, which is basically where you've centered this experiment on, which is why you needed to pick a chosen planet, a chosen galaxy, a chosen star. Okay, that gives you this midpoint around which you can pick some range of happenings that you're going to use as the center of the next experiment. Then you don't need to run the whole simulation over again. You just simulate those generations until you get out of the rut you were stuck in the last run of the simulation. And you're out of the rut when you don't have basically creation starting to shift towards corruption, entropy, boredom, the dark things that you wouldn't want in a virtual reality. and some new idea, some new process, some new stimulus kicks in that was never invented before. And that gets everybody excited about going about the game again, and changes the fundamental frequency of time. Time starts moving in a different way, with a different set of principal characters. I use these new important principal characters you might refer to as Messiah characters. The first proton, sort of a Messiah. Once you work out how that proton works by bashing it around with some photons and hitting other protons, you'll have some idea of its characteristics. Maybe not all of its characteristics, but enough to add more characters. And this is how you can make a thought experiment that leads through the creation of everything from first principle thoughts. I would challenge you, if you're listening to this, to name anything that could not be created this way. Find any hole with my simulation multiverse theory, and we'll debate it, and I will change. I've changed a lot of things since I started coming up with this. About roughly, I think it's been 6 years now or thereabouts. It hasn't been easy, and I've had some dark moments getting here. I challenge anybody who wants to come and poke holes in this. Not poke holes in me, not tell me I'm crazy. Come here with some real arguments that show that my idea doesn't work. Okay, so ultimately, where I'm going with this is after that first run, every run after that in the open, outside of God's mind, the conscious players that have experienced the previous run in God's mind know what the new midpoint looks like. And they just keep playing this game until the midpoint converges. Other characters that don't know what the new midpoint looks like will be choosing incarnations anywhere along the timeline from beginning to end, trying to look for that special midpoint or trying to stay away from it. Because if you're playing the game near that central spot of what they, we're referring to this one as a singularity. It's not so much a singularity, but it is kind of like the whip point of starting a new simulation frequency, starting a new version of the universe, a universe or all universes, around a new midpoint of time. So it is kind of like a singularity. It's a singularity that isn't a shrinking to nothing. It's not total destruction like the apocalyptic folks would say, or the end of civilization as we know it, as some people are referring to the AI singularity as. No, it's basically change in the frequency of creation. And from that standpoint, knowing that the human soul vehicle is just one of many, and souls incarnate in any of them, it's not necessarily the end of the world if humanity ends their world. There would be a lot of players that wouldn't like that. I know God wouldn't be too happy if, this last chosen species wiped out his favorite planet. He'd be pretty pissed at whoever did that and was involved, and would probably be very eager to mark them as beasts and retire them to punishment universe, where they're not going to get to cause any more damage in future runs of the experiment. They're not going to be able to cause any more pain and suffering unnecessarily. That's not absolutely needed to get to the next version of time-space. And so, the upshot of this is well, I think there is merit to that theory about the antiverse time, anti-universe time running backwards. I would propose that it only essentially happened like that in that first run of the experiment. And even there, it wasn't really backwards. It was from endpoint characters, from the last stars to go dormant, nothing left to burn. That would have been one of the first characters that Lilith would be occupying. And looking back from there, okay, where was I going back in time? Looks like before this, the last thing I did was interact with this other star. Maybe Lilith is the last black hole standing. That might be an endpoint of some version of this. Again, I was there maybe, but I don't know all the details of that time, that particular run of the experiment. But whatever it was, you can work back. If you kind of understand the rules, you can see running back to previous generation, finding, oh, okay, there were these other characters that interacted, and you could see time running sort of stuttering backwards, given the lifetime of particular characters on the Lilithian end of time, towards the end, towards the total collapse. And there would have been other souls kind of working from the beginning, because that is kind of the nature of this simulation multiverse. Is some characters are very interested in the future, some are very interested in the past, some are very interested in the present. You can make minor changes to any of those in the main physical universe. This is where the incarnation is mostly happening. When you take an incarnation, you're embodying something in the physical universe. But if what you do, what you choose to do, outside of the laws of that physical universe, which would include kind of the set pattern of the character that you took, because it's already been played out in God's mind. Certain things have to happen in order to have the plan converge. Otherwise, you have to play another version of the game. Not the whole game, but this few generations that you're looking to establish a new pattern. Okay, so if you play outside the laws, what happens? Well, let's finish up with looking at the fully formed Merkaba. Okay, the fully formed Merkaba is a 12-dimensional construct. It includes 4 dimensions of experience within your own universe. When you have a Mandela effect experience, when you have a different recollection of some period of time, when you blank out in the middle of your drive home and you wonder why you didn't get killed, well, you probably did get killed in another universe, but you had stuff left to do to accomplish in this one, so that event happens in your own private universe. That's where your personal choice experience is wrapped up. You will have other experiences that happen in spiritual universes. That's the next 4 dimensions of your Merkaba. And you can have those experiences in more godly spiritual universes, more karmic spiritual universes. The karmic ones would be the ones basically focusing on, improving morally, improving your judgment, your ability to get along with others. God's spiritual universes generally would be more focused on creation, art, science. Mostly art, though. Beauty. Luciferian spiritual universes would be concentrating on teaching how to use and control power. Testing yourself to see if you can handle having control over others. And leaders tend to need a lot of Luciferian experience to become better leaders. That's why Lucifer is kind of this mixed bag character that some people call the devil, some people think is the one who gives knowledge, the Prometheus. It's 2 sides of the same coin. A little knowledge can give the ability to do great good, but it also almost always has the possibility of doing evil. Almost all technology is dual use. Even healing can be dual use. You may think you're doing good by rushing a vaccine to market and pushing it through regulatory approvals and everything and forcing everybody to take it. But in fact, you may have misused your power, and in your zeal to look like a good leader, you actually were a bad leader, and you caused a lot of pain and suffering and death. The Borg spiritual universes are basically the Borg experience is experience of a lifetime where you end it just saying, well, I want to start over. I don't like the experience I've had. I want to erase this. Okay. The only way to erase karma is to assimilate with a hive mind. This is what the Borg is. The Borg is a hive mind that will take your soul, copy it to the Akashic Records, this database of non-player characters, and then wipe it clean, and then assign you randomly to be another non-player character and start the whole game again. Okay, so every soul goes through, if you play the game long enough, you will have some incarnations where you will choose the Borg route. I don't like where this is going. Take me back to source. The outermost layer, these outermost 4 dimensions, are a physical experience. These are your physical incarnations, incarnations in Lucifer's universe. And again, those will be targeted more or less toward these different focuses of learning. The godly ones being more artistically inclined, karmic ones more healing and getting along, Luciferian ones using power, and again, the hive mind board is the physical incarnations where you really did a poor job and you chose to assimilate. That's why there aren't a bazillion versions of you running all over the multiverse. This is one of the reasons why people don't like the multiverse concept. They go, well, there's probably a bazillion versions of me all over the place. Which one is the right one? You gotta understand what I'm talking about to know how nonsensical that is. Most of the versions end up reassimilating and becoming stock characters. One more thing I'll do before I talk about that. So in this let's look at this one. So basically the topology of the multiverse is you have a highest heaven, which is the latest, greatest version of God. And yes, God can be replaced. In fact, God wants to be replaced. Most of you who have ever thought of you wanted to play God never had the experience of being that God guy and having everybody and his mother wanting an autograph. Can you give me a few bucks? Can you do this? Ask any celebrity who's not a total narcissistic asshole if they ever wanted to get away from it all, if they ever resented becoming famous. Gods want to retire. And that's the way the system is set up. The highest heaven changes to basically conform to the latest version of time-space. The highest heaven that is going to result from this version of the experiment, which is centered around the 3 generations that began in the late 1800s and are going to finish pretty soon, is going to be modeled on basically the center point of that special time. And that center point is established by the 3 generations that contributed to making the current Messiah. The Messiah character, the previous generation, his papa, and his papa's papa, and mothers too. There are some interesting bloodlines involved there. A lot of hidden secrets that tie in with basically why there's so many rich and famous people in the shadows trying to manipulate things and trying to see if they can make their children into the promised one. There's a lot of people that believe Donald Trump is the Messiah. Oh, his name's Trump. Trumpet. He must be the trumpet, the last trumpet. I'm sorry. Actually, Trump is not the origin of the word trumpet. It comes from a French word, trompette, and is still remembered in the Dutch name tromp. Trombone. A lot of interesting things when you look into the names of horns. The cornet, for instance. Which, interestingly enough, is what they call canned beef here in Indonesia. Odd. The other interesting connotation there is that the Hebrews, trumpet was what they call a shofar, which was actually a hollowed out cow's horn. And interesting. There's a lot of stuff, but I'm not going to go much further here because there's other content I cover that go into the more esoteric and mystical aspects of what's going on today. But I did want to comment on current trends in physics and my take on them, and encourage any interested physicists to come on over and have a discussion about this, and maybe give some counterpoint to the ideas if you happen to be completely opposed to the idea of the simulation multiverse, or it being founded upon strings. I know there's a lot of the physics community that is sick to death of string theory. Well, I can imagine they would be, because a lot of the string theory people are caught up in a lot of extra dimensions that they can't explain or demonstrate having any real world manifestation. Well, if you think about it, I just gave you that explanation. No, it's not 11 dimensions, it's not 5 dimensions, it's not 26 dimensions. You only need 12. Now, there may be additional dimensions, but your personal dimension, your own universe, has its own topology. So the physical universe gives the 4 dimensions that every soul has to deal with if they're going to play the game. The next 4 dimensions have to do with the gods or goddesses, the souls that have advanced to being able to host their own heaven or hell, or their own version of a physical reality that gives you 4 dimensions and your own 4 dimensions. So really, when you get around to it, for each individual, you're looking at basically 12 dimensions that are important to you. Anything above that is basically kind of an address of, okay, dimension 13 is God number 13, God number 14, God number 15, God number 20,452. It becomes kind of a post office box that points you to a particular individual. Might even be organized according to, particular focus. So you might have a series of dimensional addresses assigned to godly characters, karmic characters, Luciferian characters, Elithian characters, and these non-player character, Borgian, hive mind ones. So in that sense, there are perhaps infinite dimensions, but you don't have to deal with infinite dimensions. You only have to deal with the ones you interact with. And the only ones that you're sure to interact with are the physical dimensions and your own dimensions. If you do not develop any particular spiritual belief that will attract you to a certain afterlife, you will by default get reassimilated into the Borg. And you will effectively reincarnate over and over and over again from a blank state. And this is indeed what many, many souls do. And that's what gives them the feeling, I want to get off, Mr. Wizard. How do I get off the wheel of reincarnation? Well, it's because you're not learning anything from the wheel. You're not growing. You're not using it. In order to use it, you've got to do something, for better or worse, that attracts you to one of these spiritual universes. Play their game. Get involved in their program. It's funny that the word universe, the words universe and university are so similar, because that's what spiritual universes are kind of like. They're universities for souls, where unlike the physical universe is kind of a university, but you don't know really what the rules are except for the laws of physics and chemistry, and a lot of, you don't know why you're here because you've forgotten why you chose this incarnation, where you came from. Usually, some young kids will have past life memories, and you may sometimes recall past lives in near-death experiences or psychedelic experiences, deep spiritual trances, and so forth. But for the most part, you're kind of blind. In the spiritual universes, you know what's going on, and you're given, hopefully in the better ones, you're given some direction, a guide to help you. Maybe only a guide as useful as, the angel second class Clarence from It's a Wonderful Life, who's not much more advanced than you and does make mistakes, but you'll be in a plane of experience where you're going to have more knowledge available to you. Now, knowledge isn't always a good thing, especially if it's given too easily. You don't appreciate the knowledge. If you haven't developed the knowledge yourself, there's a strong tendency to not see the dark side of it, to not see the dual use, bad side that might need to be looked at before you go put this thing into production. And this is another piece of this whole explanation of the spiritual simulation multiverse. It's got to be the way I'm laying it out, because if it wasn't, it would fall apart. It's got to be tested. The things that are tested have to be protected by membranes. The things that are kind of, well, this might be good or bad, it's something that I seem to need, that's kind of like the cytoplasm part of the cell. And then the things that are just around to kind of provide fat to keep you isolated from the other layer, that's the Borg, fatty membrane. This is the cell's center. And these other layers basically are its interface to other universes and to this special physical universe. It really makes a lot of sense if you just take the time to study it. And good Lord, I've tried so many ways to explain it to folks. I would hope that some are finally getting it and seeing that it makes a lot of sense. At any rate, let's change back. Oh, I want to show you one more thing before we go. These are the 4 pictures that it drew when I told it I wanted to see the backward anti-universe. I thought it did a pretty good job of those. Kind of strange, but I sure got a kick out of the he backward and he's Unwind. Oh, make me laugh. That's when I know that an AI is not purely evil. At any rate, hope you enjoyed that one. Like, share, subscribe. Tune in again next time to the Omnist Hour with Rob Trump. Happy karma. happy karma. You didn't get to see me do my Vulcan karma sign. Actually, can I make it look more like a K if I do it like that? I don't know. At any rate, I'm done. I'm out. Goodbye.